Okay, our next podcast is going to continue with our look at diversity of life on Earth. And we've covered all the major groups of life, including different forms of microorganisms, to plant diversity and fungi, looking at various groups of fungi. And our last group is to look at the animals, the most complex group of organisms on the Earth. And so in this, we'll be looking at the major phyla, the major groups of life of animal life that exist. But we can start by just mentioning about the diversity in general of animals. Animals are very diverse, over 1 million different species of animals, and some things that distinguish animals from other groups of life are things like they lack cell walls, like plants and fungi that have cell walls. Animal cells do not have cell walls. Um, Ingestion is a characteristic of animals. They have to ingest their food, so they are heterotrophic. That's a characteristic of animals. They experience or they exhibit reproduction and embryonic development. So, in this embryonic development, which is characteristic of all animal life, they develop from a zygote, which is produced from the fusion of sperm and egg. So the female produces the egg, male produces the sperm, and those unite in a zygote, a diploid zygote. And then through the development of the zygote, through cell division, the embryo will develop. This is referred to as embryonic development. So the cell divides from 1 into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, and so forth. And the first thing that will develop will be a hollow ball of cells. This is for all animal life. And that hollow ball of cells is referred to as a blastula. All right, and so there's really no distinguishing between the different animal lives at this point. We start with one cell and it just divides and forms this hollow ball of cells called the blastula. That is referred to as cleavage, that formation of this blastula. The next step is referred to as gastrulation. And gastrulation is when that hollow ball of cells starts to fold inwards. Those folding, those folds that are taking place in the blastula will eventually become part of the internal systems of that animal. Digestive tract and things like that will arise from this folding. It takes on levels of tissue at this point, ecto and endoderm tissue and the blastocele. And so these levels of tissue are all part of this developmental stage here as well. Now, from here, the animal will develop into an immature fetus at this point, but it will, there's various stages that for different types of animals. Some animals will have larval stages, and this is an immature stage, and it's morphologically very different from adult animals, and then it can go through a metamorphosis and then develop into the adult, kind of like the caterpillar and the butterfly. But there's a lot of other insects and amphibians that have different larval stages. Okay, so that's a distinguishing characteristic of all animals, is this embryonic development. Now, looking at animals in history, when we look back, say, at the fossil record, we can see a lot of fossils of animals in the geologic strata, in the rock formations. And so, making sense of those fossils is sometimes confusing when we find these fossils. What do they mean? What's their relationship to animals that exist today? But there is an interesting event that occurred in the past that we can devise from the fossil bed, and that is called the Cambrian explosion. Now there's layers of rock. We'll look at this more in our next course where we get into this, a little geology, a little bit more, but here we can recognize that in this one layer of rock called the Cambrian layer, there is a lot of animals that appear there in that rock formation. And so this is called the Cambrian explosion, because the layers of rock prior to that, we do not see this type of animal life existing. And so biologists have referred to this as the Cambrian explosion, sometimes called biology's Big Bang. But it's an interesting phenomenon in the past that we can kind of document by those fossils we see in that layer. Okay, the next thing we can look at is start talking about characteristic of animals. Now, there's a lot of diversity. We mentioned there's over 1 million different species of animals, and some of the things that we can use to distinguish some of the characteristics and designs of animals is in their symmetry. Animals have different symmetries, and symmetry is how the body plan is laid out. So here's a couple of common examples: radial and bilateral. Radial is kind of, there's a central portion and it radiates out. You can think about it radiating out from the central portion, or like a radial tire. There's a center to it and it radiates out. So here this anemone has radial symmetry. There's a center to it and it radiates out. Here this crayfish does not exhibit that radial symmetry. It exhibits a symmetry called bilateral. That's where we can cut it right down the middle, and the left mirrors the right. That's called bilateral. So that's looking at kind of the symmetry in different body plans, and so those are important characteristics as we begin to look at the major groups of life that exist on Earth, and that's what we're going to do now. So by groups, we're going to look at the category under kingdom. So of course we're looking at the kingdom Animalia. So the category, or the layer level underneath the kingdom level, is the phylum level, phyla level. So we're going to look at individual phyla of all of the major groups of animal life. All right. And we'll look at the major characteristics of these groups and their habitat, kind of where they're found, and just briefly maybe a little of their reproduction. But we are just kind of introducing each of these major groups here as far as understanding their diversity. We'll get into more detail in the next course about systems and things like that inside of these animals. Okay, we're going to start with invertebrates. So when you think about an animal, you probably think about maybe a horse or a dog or something, but most animals, about 99% of animals, are invertebrates, meaning they do not have backbones. So here we're talking about like insects and worms and things like that, but so most animals are invertebrate animals. So most of these phyla that we'll talk about are invertebrates. Then we'll look at one phyla that includes all the vertebrates. So we're going to start with the phylum Porifera in the outline. You can follow along. So the phylum Porifera are the sponges. So here's an example of a sponge here. So sponges, we mentioned they're mainly saltwater animals. There are also some that are freshwater, but these are the simplest of animals. They are considered animals. They're heterotrophic. They have to ingest their food, And but they have very few organs, or no organ systems. They have no head, no mouth, no gut cavity. They just have this one body structure that has some openings. The openings are pores. That's where the phyla name comes from. They're referred to as the phylum Porifera. And so water is pulled in through these pores, and then it exits through a large opening. And so that's the phylum Porifera, and these are the sponges. These animals are always sessile. That means that they attach to a surface. And so this surface, so that's an important term there. There's some other animals that apply to this, but sessile, attaching to a surface. So they don't swim around in the ocean. They attach to a surface there, and then they filter feed. Water that comes in and out of the animal is where its food comes from. They have these unique collar cells that they use for capturing those food materials. All right, they're hermaphrodites. We've mentioned that term before, meaning that there's one individual has both male and female structures on the same animal. All right, and so that is the phylum Porifera. The next phyla that we are going to look at are the phylum Cnidaria. So the cnidarians include the anemones and jellyfish, and hydras are in there as well. But they all have a body style of either a polyp or a medusa. So they have tentacles, these animals, and the polyp form has tentacles that project up from one end. So that's like an anemone here. And the medusa form has tentacles that hang down in a bell shape. That would be like many jellyfish have the medusa body form. So all cnidarians have one or the other of these body forms. Most of these are marine as well. There are a few that are freshwater, like our hydras. Here's a hydra here. It's a freshwater cnidarian, and they all have these stinging cells that are found on their tentacles, and so that's unique to them. They also have a nervous system that is made up of a series of neurons that form a nerve net. So a very simple nervous system. They do not have a ganglia or brain or anything like that, just a nerve net, a scattering of these neurons. They exhibit radial symmetry, and so that's the phylum Cnidaria. The next phyla that we look at, or here's some examples of cnidarians here: anemones, jellyfish, and some are colonial, like these hydrozoas. So the jellyfish are scyphozoans, and the anemones are anthozoans. Okay, and then the last group we'll mention in this podcast are the flatworms. That name comes from their body shape, flattened, and this is the phylum Platyhelminthes. Now these are found in fresh salt and on land, and there's a variety of these. Some are parasitic, and like tapeworms are included in this group. There's also flukes, and so there's some diversity in this group, but this is the flatworms, again named for the body shape being flat. Platyhelminthes is the phyla. So we're going to end there, and we have a number of more phyla, including the vertebrates that we're going to look at, but we'll continue that in the next podcast on animal diversity.